talk show. I'm your host, Jennifer Collins, along with my friends, Emily and Christy, and we have a guest this week, Naomi Rozak. The whole purpose of our show is to demonstrate that life goes on and healing happens as long as you keep on moving forward. One of our special focuses this week will be about your faith journey. Whether you choose to move forward in Christianity or you find another alternative, what's important is that you do move forward and you do it from a place of lots of reflection and thoughtfulness. So one thing we usually do just pretty much every show is we talk about kind of where we've been and where we are. And that gives the listeners sort of a framework for understanding where each person's coming from. So I thought we would do that again this week, but maybe we'll spend a few minutes first just listening to Naomi since she's our special guest. Naomi, you want to just take it away and tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Naomi. I'm 41. I live in the Edmonton, Alberta, Canada area. I am married to James Rozak, whom some of you might know as the author of Morning Mercy. He has a website and podcast to help people who have left the message with the psychological impact of being in a high demand group. I'm a mother to a 16-year-old and 14-year-old. One is homeschooled, one is in a local public program that is progressive education. And I'm really busy kind of juggling the two of those in addition to all the many smaller pieces of my life. I'm also a Reiki energy healer, and I practice a second modality that helps people to really immerse into their inner world, their inner consciousness, and interpret the different signals from their body that could be telling them something is happening in their lives, whether that's emotions, pain symptoms, just really the gamut of anything that we go through inside of ourselves. So Jennifer, when you said this journey is one of reflection and thoughtfulness, this is kind of right the center of where I like to be and what I like to talk about, because so much of my journey has been learning to get to know myself and to really come from that place of reflection of what works for me and what doesn't. My husband and I left the message in February of 2013, so we're going on 11 years, and I'm happy to report we're feeling pretty settled and happy these days. It's been quite a journey. There was a lot of difficulty in there, and especially I'm really happy to be here with the three of you. It feels like a sisterhood in a way, because right after we left, there was a Facebook group for all of us together, and all of you were in there, and we were kind of taking this journey of discovering the world outside of the message together. And so I'm very fond of all of you and really grateful to actually have the chance to have a conversation with you all.
When I first left the message, I left because of what I perceived as incongruentness with Christianity. I felt like the message was taking something that had established beliefs and using it to create something brand new. And so what I really wanted to do is get back to the basics on Christianity. So we found a healthy church. We went to an evangelical church in Denver, Colorado. And it was a healthy church. I have no negative memories from the church. Everybody there was really nice and accepting. However, at some point, it became very clear that even within that context, the sort of kind of broad questions that I had were not something that could be addressed in that environment. So some of the things I was questioning was like Orthodox doctrine, the meaning of Jesus's death and resurrection, inspiration and reliability of Scripture, and all those things. They're good questions, but it's not the sort of thing that is easily and well addressed inside of a church body, because they're so foundational to the Christian belief structure. Like, how do you address that when you're trying to help people with their day-to-day, like Christian walks? We just weren't there yet. I wasn't there yet. I needed to get back to like the fundamental nature and personality of God. And so I decided to step away. And so I started exploring the writings of C.S. Lewis and Rob Bell, like more like I would say liberal Christian perspectives. And then I started looking into Christian history, like Aispius, he was an early Christian historian, Bart Ehrman, even the American founding fathers. I found a lot of comfort in their writing because some of them were prolific writers, and they were also kind of in the same place as me. They were questioning what it meant to be Christian and how that intersected into their modern world. Not the modern world anymore, I guess, but it was the modern world for them, and it was very different from the biblical world. And they spoke a lot about that, especially Thomas Jefferson and a few of the others. I have embraced, I love poetry. I find a lot of inspiration in, people like at Walden Pond and Walt Whitman and those sorts of writings. So I've tried a handful of liberal Christian churches. I'm really, in tune. I feel like I would fit in well at a Unitarian Universalist church. I haven't joined one because the closest one to me is like an hour and 10 minutes away, one-way trip, and that's just insurmountable with a family and everything. So the other churches that are closer, that I feel like I would fit in better, they don't have programs for kids and families, which is kind of a deal breaker for me because I want to go there with my family. So we haven't really joined a church since we've moved to Florida. Right now I'm going to a mom's group it's an Assemblies of God church, but they're really nice, accepting. My daughter goes to the youth group. I have no problem being around Christian people. It's actually a preference of mine. It's how I see spirituality. It's how I talk about spirituality. That's the framework that I know and I'm familiar with. But I also recognize my outside of itness now. I'm not a Christian in the traditional sense, though I do think in the historic sense I'm still a Christian. I have all of the life views. I believe in a higher power. I believe in God. I do still read my Bible, though it's alongside other works, and I do read it kind of in a deconstructionist way still. I haven't gotten back to a place where it's anything more for me than just me trying to figure out what this thing is and where I fit in it. So that's kind of where I am. I haven't explored a lot of the spiritual practices that Naomi brings to the table, and I'm really interested in hearing more about her experience and how she found out about these things and where it's brought her in her life, because it sounds very interesting and very helpful.
I feel sort of like it's bad manners to go before Emily, but I have a couple things I want to respond to in each of the things that you two said. And if I don't do it before I forget, I'm likely to forget. So one thing I wanted to say to Naomi is that what you were talking about with the healing is very interesting to me, because I have a herniated disc in my lower back. And one of the avenues that I've pursued is myofascial release. And one thing that my myofascial release practitioner taught me was to pay very close attention to my comfort level. And when I started to become uncomfortable, to shift, to change position. And I think some of what you're talking about emotionally and maybe mentally and is sort of the same thing, just paying very close attention to what it is. And when those alarm bells start to ring a little bit, adjust, respond, move along. And Christy, you were talking about C.S. Lewis. I have never thought of C.S. Lewis as liberal, but C.S. Lewis is one of my big favorite people, one of my big favorite writers of all time. And when we were sort of throwing around the idea of picking favorite quotes, I'm still undecided between a Madeleine L'Engle quote and a C.S. Lewis quote, because those two people just really say a lot of things that resonate well with me. I'm finally getting back to a place of reading a lot. for a while, it was because of my eyesight that I didn't read a lot because I needed reading glasses, and reading glasses are a pain. And then I finally had glasses, and then I don't know. There's something about the modern lifestyle with apps and texts and things. I feel like it has shortened my attention span a little bit. But I think there's a practice to reading, and so I'm trying to get back into it. I'm actually in the second of C.S. Lewis's whatever his space trilogy. I've read Out of the Silent Planet, and I'm in Paralandria now, and it's very, very interesting. But anyway, as far as where I am faith-wise, when we left, we went into a very conservative Southern Baptist church, and that lasted, I think, second grade to sixth grade, like 4 years, and then we were in a mega church for a while, and that was, I think that was 4 years also. And we've been at a local United Methodist church for, maybe about 4 years. So I'm starting to see a pattern here. 4 years. But anyway, I definitely see myself growing and changing. Ideas that resonate with me at one time don't continue to resonate all the way through. I think that on the basics and the important stuff, there's no variability, but there are certain things at my community Bible study, we would call them non-salvific issues, things that don't have to do with salvation. And on those, I can see myself, changing from time to time and from a period of my life to period of my life, probably based on my experiences and just probably experience. That's probably exactly what is causing me to shift in some of those areas. All right, Emily, your turn finally.
Hey, thank you. No problem. I've enjoyed listening to all three of you and just kind of sitting here seeing different aspects of your own journey and my journey. And it's funny because when I first left the high control group, my first kind of inkling if there was a God, because I thought God was just a complete asshole if he really existed, and like, who cared? So is there a God was kind of the first question. Then I actually, kind of opposite of Christy, I lean more towards the liberal side first. At that point in time, as far as like gay affirming churches, there were not many of them around. And so I was contemplating going to one of those about an hour away, and then ended up actually going locally to the church where my grandma went. I think she about dropped on the floor when I called her and said, "Hey, Grandma, can I go to church with you on Sunday?" Unbeknownst to me, she actually knew that we were in kind of something that was a little cray-cray and just tolerated us. Here we thought, oh, we're such a great witness to Grandma, and here Grandma's actually going, they're in something. Red lights flashing, danger, danger. So it was intriguing going and hearing all the things that I thought we were the only ones privy to. So it was a lot. And then reading my Bible and going, wait, this is what it says. I was lied to. And then as time progressed and traveling overseas, I learned that I don't really care what the name is on the front of the structure. What's going on inside? What's the leadership like? One of my really, really good friends is a female minister, and she gets it, and she is on fire for God, and I really, really appreciate her deep thoughtfulness and consideration and openness to things. I think being in the high control group we were in, everything is so black and white. So can you imagine someone in a high control group sitting down with our various, where we've landed currently on faith, sitting down and wanting to have an open conversation going, yes, Naomi, I may not fully agree with some of the stuff that I've looked into myself, but I want to hear what brought you to this point. I want to hear your take on this and how it's benefited you in your journey and where you're at in your journey. I think that's a really, really great thing, and that's part of our moving forward and our freedom in all of this. So I would say Christy has kind of dug into it, I don't know, maybe more philosophically more than I have. I don't go quite that deep, but I have some. And, healing. I believe healing happens. I believe there's different avenues of it. And I personally witnessed what I believe is a healing when I was down in Guatemala. There was a gal that got stung on the finger by an insect. We're far away from the hospital and stuff. And the swelling was visibly spreading up her hand, and she was in excruciating pain. So I held it and said a prayer, and all of a sudden the pain stopped. And again, you could visibly see the swelling retreating back on her hand. And it was just, if I hadn't been there and somebody had told me that story like I'm telling you now, I'd say you're crazy. But having witnessed it there is just incredible. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we're not aware of. And I think so much is also cultural. I think a lot of our experiences and how we perceive the experiences can be very cultural. So I appreciate digging into scripture and reading companion books that talk about the historical significance of what's being said and what was happening historically at the time. I find that very fascinating. So now I'm going to a different church in the area. When I came back from being overseas 5.5 years, the original church I was at, I just couldn't deal with it anymore, and I just needed to be lost in a crowd, so I found a different church. They're going through a pastoral transition right now. So I had somebody like, "Are you fully committed to the church's mission?" And I'm like, "Well, sorry, I can't answer that question the way you want me to answer that. I'm waiting to see who comes in as the new pastor, and then I'll make my decision. I don't go according to party lines." So, yeah. I know we talked in the wedding episode, our wedding's going to be a little bit too heathen for the Christians and a little bit too Christian for the heathen. So it's going to be a fun time for us. So that's kind of where I fall and where my fiance falls. We're a little bit, we conform, but we don't conform, and we're very happy there. So the tenets of faith, kind of where Lee Strobel fell. I do believe in Jesus. I believe the story is true. And beyond some of the very, very core foundations of Christian faith, I'm a little more gray area in a lot of things than other people just because of my experiences being overseas. So that's kind of where I'm at. I love Jesus and I cuss a little.
A little bit country and a little bit rock and roll.
Something like that, yep.
And I think that's one of the things we want to be a takeaway from people who are listening to this, is that it's okay for there to be a lot of gray area. We don't have to know all this stuff. We really don't. And I don't mean we don't have to know this. We just have to believe Mr. XYZ. We don't have to know everything. Just keep moving forward, right? Don't be frozen. Don't be paralyzed and afraid to explore ideas, but also don't think, oh my goodness, I have to have everything figured out exactly right. Because from what I know about God as a person that I have a relationship with, that's what I always go back to. Because when I was a little girl, I was, 7, 8, 9 years old. I entered into a relationship with a being. I believe that with all my heart. And I still know that person. And I know things about that person. Like I know that he's loving. I know that he's just. And when I read something that doesn't fit with that, well, I know that, somebody doesn't understand, because this is not the man I know. This is not my God. This is not the person I have a relationship with. So yeah, feel free. When you have a gray area, let it be gray. It's okay. You don't have to figure it all out. One of the things we wanted to talk about, the rightful place of doubt and wrestling with faith, and the untried faith and spiritual ideas are really conceptual. That's true. I think once you experience something, and that's kind of where I was coming from, that's when those are the things are the things you've experienced. But you're right, wrestling through those things, those ideas, those doubts, that anchors us.
I think, Emily, you talked about the right to change our thoughts, or I wrote down the right to change our thoughts. And it is that our spirituality is an ever evolving thing that we grapple with and we gain experience with. And so we might have our tenets of these are the unshakable things, but I think the spiritual journey is supposed to be one of growth and of change and of ever evolving. And it was part of our high demand group to say, oh yes, we get more revelation, but these are the entrenched things that we never budge on. And that taught us that we had to know what was right and wrong for every area of our lives. It was always black and white. And so in leaving the message particularly, I just found there was so much gray. And actually, I experienced it more as like a black spiritual void out there. Like there was just an emptiness and like, oh, what do I do now kind of thing. And so for the listeners, I just want to say, I'm sure many of them have already experienced this, that it's okay to be in the spiritual void or in the area of the gray unknown, and that the steps will begin to appear after a period of time. But it's also okay to not always be grappling with theology and grappling with beliefs, because there's other things to pay attention to sometimes. And if we're so wrapped up in our heads only about spirituality, which of course it's such a pressing concern after leaving the message, because we had our spirituality figured out and then we leave and suddenly we have very little figured out, except like maybe Jennifer, maybe this relationship with God or something. Like you have a couple of solid pieces that you hold on to. But yeah, just to say that it's okay to go through the gray and for it to be a long time of gray. But I don't think there's any of us who have left who haven't begun to see some light eventually in the gray and come to know some pieces for ourselves. It really just takes time sometimes. So I wanted to offer that as encouragement. Emily, you also mentioned, cultural differences in Christianity. And I think there's also personality differences within culture. There's different needs that people have too, right? So we are going to be unique, each of us, even if we're in the same type of belief structure. We have to allow for those differences of people and their own personal relationship with spirituality in there, So yeah, I just wanted to say, yes, it is very cultural and even more individual too, right? And yeah, just the autonomy. Again, you said, your wedding, the country rock and roll, the wedding that's a little bit too heathen for some and too Christian for others. But the beauty of being in a high demand group and then exiting is I think we begin to have a very strong sense of self at some point to say, thank you, I appreciate your ideas, and I still need to know what's right for me and choose what's right for me, even if it makes other people uncomfortable, because we did have that past where other people were encroaching on our boundaries and our personhood all the time, and maybe used their authority in abusive or very negative ways. And I think one of the growth pieces of leaving the message is to turn around and say, I get to think about this before I make decisions. I get to see how I feel in my heart. I get to pray about it. I get to do whatever it takes for me to feel confident and to make that decision. And it was nice to hear you say that about your church too, that I'm going to wait and see the new pastor and see how things settle before I'm committing, But yeah, for me, it was quite a journey because the message was my security. It was what I loved. I was the righteous of the righteous is what I would have called myself, and very sincerely so. I loved the message. I loved everything about it. I loved that we were the spiritual elite, and also felt like I had the humility of, there but for the grace of God go I. It was kind of that combination. I grew up in a very spiritual home with a single mom and 4 siblings, and the message was just really revered. And so leaving it was devastating, not just in the effects like within my family, because it changed all of the relationships with my siblings and my mom, but it was really the foundation I had built on. And I've come to realize that when my parents divorced when I was very little, that was when I started to move into Christianity / the message. And that was my security blanket. That was what I held on to as the one unchanging thing in my life. And so when the message went away, when it got to the point where I knew that I couldn't place my trust in the church and I couldn't stay in a church where that doctrine was the foundational piece and people would reject the gospel for message doctrine, I knew that I had to go, and I knew that I couldn't raise my children there. Actually, the kind of the linchpin that changed it was when my kids came in from Sunday school one morning and they were waving a coloring picture of the log cabin that Brother Branham supposedly was born in. And they were like 5 and 3. And I just couldn't comprehend of little children being taught about a man in the woods instead of just being taught simple things about Jesus. And I knew then, because we had already been known of many of the discrepancies by then, and Branham had gone from like a prophet to me down to like, well, maybe a man of God, but maybe makes some mistakes and maybe not everything is truthful. I wasn't thoroughly convinced that his ministry was completely false or anything, but at that point I was just seeing all around our church so much fear and defensiveness around it. Not a lot of people willing to actually examine the truth. They were just clinging to what they believed was truth, and they were fiercely saying in every way imaginable, just emotional, by shutting down, by withdrawing, all these different things, that they were going to choose William Branham and his message no matter what. And I could see very clearly that I couldn't stay there. Even if the church changed at some point, I couldn't stay any longer. And so we left. And we looked for churches around the area. Jennifer, you might laugh at this because there was a strong Baptist church a few blocks from our home. But when we looked at the website, they were very clear that they sing only the traditional hymns in their church because modern worship music didn't contain the right doctrinal foundation for them. And I thought, ooh, I don't think this is the church for us. So we went a little further afield, thankfully, and landed in a really beautiful I guess technically at one time it had been a Lutheran church, and it was more of just a warm and welcoming neighborhood church by that point, but with a strong German Lutheran element in the congregation, as that was kind of the foundations of the church. And I plugged into the women's Bible study right away because I needed community and I needed support, and I was hurting desperately because I'd pretty much lost all of my friendships after leaving the Message Church. And it was really beautiful for about 2 years, beautiful in the church, beautiful the things that I saw. I loved how the ministry was, they were just more people as part of the congregation. They weren't celebrity status. They weren't like lifted up above everybody. There were 5 different ministers, I think, and they all took turns. There was a youth pastor who would speak in one way, and then the elderly one would do more doctrinal stuff, and the middle-aged one would just do basic teaching. And I could leave the church every Sunday with like a whole page of like really pithy and applicable notes, which had never been my experience before, like things you could really apply to your life. But I found by about year 2 that some of it was just starting to sound cliche for me. I was just beginning to have real difficulty inside of myself, believing that God ordered every little thing, or that people could suffer and he wouldn't intervene even though he could. So I was beginning to have some questions about the character of God and the experiences I was going through, as well as simple biblical and doctrinal things. And Christy, I'm glad you listed them out because I didn't do the work ahead of time to point by point do it, because that's not how I approach things. I approach things on a very felt basis and processing all these ideas through my body. And so sometimes when I go back to the memories, I can't remember the details anymore. I just remember the feelings that I had at the time. So yeah, some of the questions were, we had been taught the Bible is inerrant, and we were taught it through one lens, which is William Branham. But as I began to read it with a more critical lens, I could see that there were discrepancies that weren't, for me, easily explained. And I knew there were apologetics for all of this stuff. There were books written about scriptures and things. And I did some reading and I did some research. But I think really what was happening for me was my heart was wrestling through this idea of a loving God who could also allow me to be raised for 30 years in a high demand group and then to suffer for several years afterward. And I don't think there are any easy answers to something like that. I knew him as a loving God. I had a personal relationship with him, but there came a point where what I heard and felt him saying was, trust me, trust me, trust me. And I was like, I just can't at this point. You know, I might trust you, but I don't trust that the Bible is true. I might trust you, but I don't trust the evidence of what I'm seeing around me. I don't trust the pat answers. And I had a lot of difficulty with Christianity as a whole and the very pat, tidy answers they give to things. And I am grateful that now, 10 years later, there's so much more writing about suffering and the difficult pieces of Christianity, LGBTQ, ideas, all the things that can pose deep inner trouble for people. And I always say that maybe if I'd learned a more progressive type of Christianity earlier on, I might have been able to stay. Christy, I looked at the Unitarian Church for a while and thought, maybe. And when it came down to it, my heart just wasn't in it any longer. There came a point where I was so full of anxiety over theology. I had been studying it for a year before we left the message and 3 years after, and literally could not concentrate on my present life because my body was so full of anxiety about, who is God? And I didn't believe there was hell anymore by that point, but I had a lot of inner things I was still working through. And I just decided I had to make an executive decision here. And I took all of my biblical books, my many copies, translations of the Bible by then, all my devotional books, my Beth Moore, and who I had dearly loved and really enjoyed reading her studies and all of those things. And I packed them into a very far corner of my crawl space. And I said, okay, I'm just going to put my feet on the ground and I'm going to learn how to live like my literal, tangible, present life right now. By then I had a 5 and 7-year-old. My kids are neurodivergent, which means my husband and I probably are as well. And we had some things to just figure out as a family. My kids really demanded and needed my attention. They were both homeschooled as well. We needed to start building some community. And so I just felt like at that point I struck out into the great unknown, but I really took the spiritual questions and put them to the side because I couldn't do it any longer. And then I had to kind of say, well, if my life isn't going to be built around this, and I, of course, had like some grief and sadness and fear and all of those things around it, but what am I going to build my life around? And so just in my journal, I began to ask some questions, and a lot of this was reading books by famous people, books you've probably heard of by now. Glennon Doyle had one. She just released a book called Untamed, but one of her first was called Carry On Warrior, and she talked about how she came to perceive God a little bit differently. And so I'd read some of that book and say, oh, like I really believe some of these things that she's writing that are just a slightly different, less maybe Christian doctrinally correct ideas of God. And then I'm trying to think. I read Post-Traumatic Church Syndrome by Reba Riley, which is a really beautiful book where the voice of God, or whatever you want to call it, came to her and told her to try 30 religions before her 30th birthday. But she had come from a strict Pentecostal background and had a lot of religious trauma. And her journey just, at the same time, I was leaving what I felt like I was doing was leaving spirituality behind, but her journey really made me feel that at some point I am going to figure this out. I just can't do it right now. But what I was doing was like picking up little gems or crystals along the way and kind of storing them inside, not knowing that one day they're going to kind of create a bigger picture for me. I just was looking for anything I could hold on to, and I find books very inspirational and ideas like that. So I kept reading books when I came across them. Martha Beck is somebody else who I'd recommend, who writes a lot about finding what you want your life to be about and shaping your life around that. And she has a very spiritual tone to many of her books as well. And so while I was doing this time of figuring out how to get my boots on the ground, I was still reflecting on my past 30 years and saying, well, what were the things that made me excited? Who did I like being around the most? What were the happiest times of my life and why? What kind of hobbies were interesting? What new things are happening that are interesting for me now? And I started to experiment. My son and I signed up for a hip hop class. It was awful. Hip hop is not for me to actually do. I look like a fairy trying to do like literally like too feminine or flowery or something for hip hop. But it was good to try it, right? And figure out this isn't for me. And then one of the next things I started was yoga. And just happened to find the right people at the right time to be my yoga instructors. And what I didn't realize was that I'd spent a lot of my life disconnected from my body since my parents divorced when I was really young, and I didn't really know it. And through the practice of yoga, I began to learn to just feel my emotions and feel where they were in my body and what it felt like when they were coming up. And I learned to begin to like drop below the head and drop down into my heart and to the different physical side of me. And as I did that, I began to find that there was a spiritual part to me. It was just kind of deeper down and less in the head than it had been before. And it was less concerned with like doctrinal things and more concerned with just feeling that connection. And so for me, it was a journey really of finding a connection, me to myself. And when I did that, I found out that I felt connected to the world around me and to whatever benevolence is out there to be a supportive presence for us. But as you can see, I just don't like being pinned down very much, and I probably never will be. I don't like to label it too much. I don't like to suggest too much. I just have to kind of own where I am and say, this is where I am, and I like the freedom of it. I like that I don't have to define it. I like that it is so personal for me, and I get to keep it close and treasure it always if I want to. And I can share if I want to, but there's just not a lot of structure or restriction placed around this connection that I have, both to myself and to what I feel in the energetic world around me, is how I'm going to say it. So, of course, there's like, I could talk for hours and hours about the many ways this went and all the little, ideas that began to come. But that's kind of where I sit now, is just an awareness, a conscious awareness that I do believe there's an intelligent energy in the world. I don't know if it created the world. I don't know anything about it except that I see and feel it and occasionally interact with it, and also don't feel like I'm missing anything. I don't feel like I have holes inside. I don't feel that I came to the world already broken or with anything wrong with me. I simply came here to have this human experience. And so I keep on opening up to that human experience, whatever it brings, and always willing to open my mind and see what else I could learn or what else might be out there for me that maybe I hadn't guessed or used to be shut down to.
I have a lot of commonality. Naomi approaches things from what it sounds like to me is you've gotten really in touch with your body and how your emotions interact with your physical self. I think that's awesome. That is not something that I have ever been comfortable with. I am very much a literal thinker. I'm a logical thinker. It makes me uncomfortable to get into my physical self and to trust my emotional self. But I feel really confident and comfortable not knowing. And I think that's something that we both have in common. I actually, at this point, when someone tells me they know something, I have a harder time with that than if somebody's just like, I don't know my left from my right. Like I have such a hard time with concrete because the message was so concrete in my life. I felt like when I had entered the message and I had accepted the doctrine, I got rebaptized. I made these concrete steps to affirm how I felt. And I felt very confident that it was right. And I was wrong. And so now, getting back to a sense of uncertainty has a calming effect. I feel more certain in the uncertainty than I ever did, and ever will again, I suspect, in having confidence and certainty. I really like the flexibility that I have now to approach evidence as it comes. And when I see something that resonates with me, I get to work it into the framework of my spirituality and my self-identity and how I live my life. I don't have to match it up against something solid that I have that's fully inflexible inside of me. I get to explore the world from this place of wonder. Me and my husband sometimes talk about it like spirituality has become science for us. It's something that we like to explore. I love to talk about it. I think it will always be an important part of my life and an important part of like what I think about and what I do. It's not the only thing, but it's certainly never going to go away. It's always going to be this thing that matters to me enough to devote time, energy, and effort to dissect and find my equilibrium and find what I believe and what I think. But yeah, I really like the idea of it being a journey. That's very good, like helpful for me to visualize that I'm here now and I'm not going to be here tomorrow. And that's comforting. It's nice to know that as I explore and as I learn new things, as I encounter new things in the world, that I'm going to be okay. Like, it's okay for me to change. I've gone through the earth-shattering, everything that you thought was wrong, and I survived. And I'm going to do that again. And so there's nothing that's holding me back from, I guess, authentic exploration of my spirituality and of what I think about spiritual things. As far as people coming out of a high control group, I think that might be scary to be quite so open to new ideas. The good thing is I didn't get to this place overnight. I mean, I've been out of the message for 10 years now. So it's been a long road to get to this place. But for me now, today, I really, really like the exploration. I like the discovery and having the freedom to do that without, I guess, judgment of myself. Judgment might not be the right word. I would say without holdups, without like hang-ups on it. I get to be authentic with myself. I get to ask the questions without feeling like I'm doing something wrong.
I really enjoyed listening to what you had to say, Naomi. And one thing I jotted down here when I was listening to you is that you don't always have to be grappling with your faith. And I think so much of the time you come out and having had a chance to interact with some other people who have just come out, it's always, is this right? Is this wrong? What do I need to do for this? It's like, just take a breath, slow down. You don't need to have it all figured out. It's okay, and I think that it took me a lot of years to figure that out. And I know I've seen in the support groups, people come out and they're on fire to tell everybody else what they found. And it's like, slow down. Let's get a few more steps into your own journey here first, because what you think may not be actually accurate as you progress. And, I know the word in Christendom of deconstruction is terrifying and has a lot of bad feeling behind it. And there's a lot of anger behind it within Christianity. And I think that's a shame, because I think deconstruction is what all of us have gone through, and it's not a scary thing. But then where do we build from, and what do we do? And Christy, you were talking about being on the journey, and how I like to kind of visualize it. People are like, do I do this? Do I not do this? I know I had ran into someone in the local gas station who said, "Hey, are you so-and-so?" And I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "How do you know?" They're like, "Oh, I follow John Collins on YouTube." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" Because I have not publicly kind of announced in the area that I'm doing this podcast out of respect for my family and working in the family business and stuff. But when it comes out, I have no shame of what I'm doing. And that'll tie into my quote that I have prepared for the end here. But I think in our high control group, we think of the journey as being a tightrope, and you got to stay on the tightrope, and you can't make one little step one way or the other. And I like to think of it as a big playground, and if you know what your safety fence is around the playground, it doesn't matter if you go on the teeter-totter, if you go on the swing, or you go on the merry-go-round or the slide. Go out, start moving, start exploring, and it's going to be okay. The black and white, is this right, is this wrong? I know in the missionary world, people are like, "Oh, I need to wait to hear God's voice." Yes, I believe God speaks to you, but it's sometimes not as precise as you think. He just wants you to get out and start moving. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I appreciated both of that. And I could sit and listen to you speak forever, Naomi. And now I have like non-related to the podcast kind of side questions. You talking about neurodivergency. I'm actually marrying a neurodivergent man. So it's definitely a topic for me, and a lot that I've learned and explored. And back to culture, I think without living overseas, I wouldn't have the perspective that I have to be able to understand a neurodivergent man. So again, what you expect relationships to be, it's not black and white like that for us, and it's okay, and I appreciate that. So I encourage any listener terrified of what the right next move is, learn who you are in yourself and ask questions. And I believe as a Christian, God wants us to ask questions and be prepared for the answers, whether it's something we want to hear or not. So I think that's really good. And it's, like you said, we met each other years and years ago on the forums, and I really, really love this opportunity to have a chance to be here and chat and hear more about your journey. So thank you very much.
Of course, I feel the same.
One thing, Emily, that you said, and it reminded me of another thought that I had listening to Naomi and to Christy. You said no shame. That's one of the refrains that I hear over and over. And there's another one that is no fear. And that is something that I would never have thought, leaving that high demand group, that I would find myself with less shame and less fear. But it's absolutely the truth. It's like, for me, because I left my high control group to follow Jesus, it's as if Jesus took a sword and just slayed the fear. It's like, it's just gone, it just doesn't exist. And, that has just been awesome. One other thing I noticed, even though Naomi and Christy were both married, like I was married when they left their high control group, neither one of you said one thing about your husband, really, when you were talking about your journey. You said, "I learned this and I felt this." And what a revelation to realize that, each of us determines our own walk through life, our own journey. And we get to figure that out for ourselves. And again, there's no fear and no shame. And that's just incredibly helpful for me, and incredibly, what is the word I'm looking for? Liberating. Yeah, right? That's just so liberating. Because really, you can't have faith that's defined by your husband's faith. You really just cannot. There's no way. Everyone has to have their own faith. Otherwise, it's not an authentic faith. So I think that was what I had, to take away from what you all said. something I really wanted us to address is something I think that Naomi had written in our notes prior, and it was talking about learning to trust and not abandon ourselves. And I think this is something that's out there, even in what I would call part of mainstream Christianity. There are thoughts out there that that anger is sinful, or that fear is always sinful. And this, I don't believe this. I believe that God gave us anger. It's an emotion, just like he made it hurt when you touch something hot. So it's a warning sign for your body, for yourself to know when you're in a dangerous situation and to make a change. So that, trusting your emotions. I realize that, within Christianity, we are taught, to give of ourselves to others and to not always seek our own greatest good. But I also see that there's a lot of unselfishness in other people who aren't just following scriptures. So, I don't know. I guess maybe there's a tension there. There's a difference between abandoning yourself and also being unselfish, because I don't think any of us would argue that selfishness is the root to happiness. But anyway, definitely something that you wrote was that we can be a more full person. Whatever our personal stories or examples are, we can be a more full person than what we ever thought before. And we continue to learn and grow all the time. And I guess it would be nice for us maybe to give examples of growth that we've seen in our lives. And if it's too tough of a question, not having thought about it before we came to this, that's okay. But if something pops in your head, feel free to share what you think about growth that you have seen in yourself or in your life since leaving your high control group.
In the high demand group, I was very much a authoritarian, very traditional parent. We spanked our children. Children should be seen and not heard. Like, that's like 1800s stuff practically, right? First time obedience, all of those ideas. It was so much like training your children to look like what you believe they should be. At the same time, I was an overwhelmed mother of neurodivergent children who can often struggle with emotional regulation as it is. I was unhealed. I didn't have emotional regulation. And so I struggled with yelling at my kids way too much. I think bordered on violence sometimes. I was not in touch with what was going inside of me. I was stuck in my head all the time, always thinking about church things and, the expectations on me. But deep down inside, I carried this shame. And the shame was that I was not good enough, and somebody was going to find out. And I had also never really felt loved by anyone. And I know that this comes from around the time my parents divorced. It's not that I never had love or that people never loved me. It just, I couldn't feel it inside of me because I had cut myself off from different pieces of feeling. So, Jennifer, you talked about what has changed and what has grown. And one of the biggest growing places for me was as I learned to be able to feel my emotions, then I could also reflect on where they were coming from, and I could gain a deeper awareness that then taught me how to take a pause when my child is doing something that feels difficult to me. I could learn to pause. I could learn to see them as, oh, they're not doing that to be difficult. They're just having a difficult time. And then I could respond as a parent who had more resources and more emotional capacity and things like that. And some of that was like reading some parenting articles and following some gentler parenting and respectful parenting resources. But really coming to see my children in their own light as beautiful souls that came to this earth with their own purpose and their own path and all of those things. Switching that mindset from like, I'm bringing them up to look like what I think they should look like and with the character I think they should have, and beginning to see them as whole people, even as babies or 3-year-olds or 5-year-olds, and just needing a little bit of not even shaping, but needing an environment to help them become that best version that they could be. The growth in me is that I'm not reactive anymore. And that, like, not to say I'm never reactive, because everyone is reactive sometimes, but I'm very much in control of myself and of my reactions, and not even in a way that's like I'm holding my anger in. It's just that, no, I'm feeling angry right now. Oh, I wonder why that anger is there. I wonder what it's trying to tell me. And I can even say to a child, I feel angry when you did this thing because, and I can explain it to them. And the funny thing is usually they just listen and they're like, oh, Mom, that makes sense. I'm sorry you felt angry, and maybe I should have done this thing instead. And so I think when I was in the message, I was so hungry for tools to grow and to become a better person, and I could not find them anywhere. I looked at the other moms, and I just saw some of them seem to hold it together, but I really have no idea what was going on behind closed doors. And many of the ones who have left the message tell me, no, I didn't know what was going on either. Like, I was not in control of my emotions. I hated my life. They've told me a lot of things. And so one of the growth pieces for me, one of the magical things that I will eternally be grateful for, is just the ability to not have my behavior and my reactions be out of control. Like, I didn't know that would be a benefit of leaving the message, and I didn't know that I could ever achieve that. And just over time, with practice and practice and practice, and gathering the tools here and having conversation with a mom at the park there and watching what other moms do sometimes, somehow that has changed. And I used to beat myself up so badly for how negatively I interacted with my kids. And I hated myself for how I parented them when I had no tools and had a lot of trauma that I was carrying that wasn't addressed. And so I just think for the rest of my life, like, I will turn around and say, oh my gosh, like, this was one thing I never, ever thought could happen. And it has been the hugest benefit of being out of a high demand group where you can be exposed to other influences to teach you better things than you might have had access to before.
I think what Naomi said about like her parenting journey being one of the biggest positive impacts of leaving and having this sort of like inner turmoil determining what it is you believe, and not having that black and white thinking for that I mean, yeah, my parenting is night and day what it was. My younger, I have a 3-year-old and I'm expecting my 4th. Their lives are going to be very different than their older siblings, just because I'm an older parent. I have experienced, the ups and downs of parenting. I started off with a very black and white framework, and I have had to adjust over time. And they're entering the world with a parent who did that work already. So they're going to have the benefits of my experiences. I think that abandoning the black and white and getting to really embrace the fullness of life experiences, getting to determine what it is I actually think about things instead of what I feel like I should think about things, that has been a huge benefit. It's been one of the most important things that has changed for me since leaving the message, is getting rid of that black and white thinking. Just in my daily interactions with other people, I don't make snap judgments about people anymore. It's very easy to have those first impression judgments, but mine are way softer than they used to be, right? Like, we would meet somebody and we would know immediately whether they were one of us, just based on how they're dressed. And now I can have a full conversation with somebody and I don't feel like I've gotten to the crux of them, to the core of them, because I know that it's more complicated than just this one isolated conversation that I've had. I know that everybody has their trials that they have behind closed doors, that nobody is an open book, that there's complexity in the world, there is gray in the world, and all of that is great. It's makes life more interesting for all of us to get to explore all of that without the fear and without the shame. And as far as like as a parent, I get to address my children as individuals, which is huge. My children have all the 3 that I have so far have been completely different humans. Like they don't have if they didn't look almost like identical, like my children look like siblings, like you can't differentiate them. They definitely are related to each other, but personality wise, they're like night and day different. All three of them are. And I get to treat all of them as different people. I don't have to parent them in the same way. There's not like a handbook that says this is how you have to discipline. They all get disciplined differently. It looks different for each of them because they are different people. And I don't think that would have been possible in a high control group. It wouldn't have been possible without that deconstruction period to really settle down what it is that I thought about things.
Thank you, Christy. Naomi, do you have any parting words for our listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, I do. I want to tell people that we have been taught in our high demand group that we cannot trust ourselves at all. We have been taught only to listen to somebody else's words and to take what they say, even about our own thoughts and feelings and emotions and bodies, as if it's like gospel truth. And to those who are just leaving, I want to say that you can trust yourself to know your own path. You wouldn't be leaving if you didn't already have some sense of self where you're like, I need to make a different decision, or I need to seek the truth, or I need to find out for myself what's right. And if you keep tapping into that sense inside of you, I don't believe it can possibly lead you astray, because you'll always be walking the path that's laid out for you anyway. Anytime you give away that sense of self to somebody else and you're like, no, you make the decision for me, or you tell me what I feel, you're disconnecting from that sense. And you might find yourself in frustrating and unfulfilling and unhappy places if you do that. But if you keep coming back to that internal sense of what's right for you and what your mind, body, spirit, soul is directing you to, I just don't believe you can go astray. And so my hope would be that you would learn to trust yourself more and more. You can check in with whatever resources or authorities you feel are important. That's completely fine. But just remember, it's your own soul at the end of the day that you have to report to, and that you have to be in touch with, and let yourself start to trust that you have within you the resources to figure out what your spiritual journey is, or what your spiritual home is, what your spiritual family will look like, and let it take as long as it takes.
Naomi, thank you for sharing. And in our notes earlier, we had talked about the possibility of sharing favorite quotes. And I believe several of us have prepared favorite quotes. I'm going to start with Emily. Emily, please share with us the favorite quote you've chosen for this evening.
Yes, my favorite quote comes from none other than Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And I think that is kind of the reason why we're all here. And for people who are listening, I know many of our listeners are on a Christian faith journey. So in case Spider-Man offends you, I will give you the words of Jesus out of Luke 12:48. He says, "From everyone who has been given much, much more will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." So I think that's why we're here on our journeys, sharing with all of you, because we feel like we have been entrusted with much, and we want to share that all with you. So that is my quote from Spider-Man.
I did. This one to me talks about our spiritual journey. And it's from Mark Nepo, who writes a lot of spiritual books and about mindfulness and meditation and things like that. And he said, "It is when we lose our map, our real knowledge of the path begins." And to me, that's about getting off the brightly lit highway of the direction that everyone said you were always going to go in your life and you thought you were going to go, and maybe stepping onto the little path that goes through the forest where it's a little darker, you can't see quite as far ahead, but you will know every single inch of that journey, and you will get to share that experience with other people.
Thank you so much. Christy, have you prepared a quote for us?
I do. I have one. It's from one of my favorite poets. His name is Walt Whitman, and it comes from, he wrote a preface to his collection of poems called Leaves of Grass. And in that preface, he said, re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem. And I just love that thought. I don't think that it's about knowing what you think. I think it's about examining what you think, figuring out what it is you actually believe about things, and having the ability to say, I'm going to sever this piece because it doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit right. And I'm going to move forward and be a more authentic version of my own self.
Thank you to Naomi Rozak for being our guest. Thank you to my friend Christy and my friend Emily, who helped me prepare this program each time we get together. And thank you, listeners, for coming along with us on our journey. We hope you found our show both informative and helpful. Please feel free to contact us at movingforwardtalkshow.com with any questions you may have or any ideas you might think of for future shows. We also answer our email if you email us at the email box on that website. I look forward to hearing from you as we continue going forward, demonstrating that life goes on and healing happens as long as you keep moving forward.